Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you for tuning in for today's webinar. I'm Sid, a product evangelist for the SIEM suite of products at Manage Engine, and I'm going to be your host and presenter for this session. So today's topic is on must-have SIEM features for IT compliance. I'm sure a lot of you out there must be in the process of complying with several regulations like the PCI DSS or HIPAA, SOX. You have new data protection regulations like the GDPR. New regulations are coming out as well in the US. We have some in Canada, Brazil. I think most people joining in today are coming in from Europe and the Americas. So you do have your fair share of regulations, that are up and coming, as well as some of the regulations that have been around for a long time. But it's not really something unique to the Americas or Europe. This is really a worldwide trend, which is why we thought of doing this session, wherein we'll talk about certain SIEM features that are important when it comes to meeting these regulatory mandates, right? So that is the topic for today's session. We're going to talk about why you need a SIEM solution in this day and age. SIEM solutions have, of course, been around for a long time, 10 to 15 years at least, since they had the first basic monitoring tools. And it's still a very important and relevant technology in this day and age. We're going to look at what regulations are typically mandating. I'm not going to go into specific examples of compliance regulations, but rather give a general high-level overview of what kind of functionalities, what kind of capabilities you should be looking at in order to align with these regulatory mandates. So that's where I talk about 6 must-have features for compliance. These are functionalities of a SIEM solution that you must have if you're looking to comply with many of these regulations. These are pretty much the same across the board in terms of the features. Perhaps the exact nitty-gritties, such as what data comes under the scope of the regulation, and maybe something like how long should you store the log data. Some of these things may vary, but this is really to give you a high-level overview of what you should be thinking about when you are deploying a SIEM solution for meeting these compliance regulations. I'll also introduce you to Manage Engine's Log360, which is our comprehensive SIEM solution from Manage Engine. And I'm not going to go too deep and give you a product demo, but I'll sort of show you the interface over the course of this webinar when I am illustrating certain examples. Now, before we get started, I would really appreciate it if you take just 30 seconds to fill out a simple survey that we have. I'm currently working on a report surveying hundreds of IT administrators to really understand the state of SIEM in the year 2020, to learn about your preferences, your struggles, your expectations from a SIEM solution, so to speak. And I have a simple survey right here that would require not more than 30 seconds of your time. And I would really appreciate it if you fill this up. So this is this link has been sent on the chat box of the Zoom panel. It just asks a simple question whether you are currently using a SIEM solution. And if you say yes or no, then you get subsequent 3 or 4 questions. And the idea of doing this is for me as an evangelist to better understand what my audience is expecting when they are deploying a SIEM solution. And I think for the IT community at large, this would be a great opportunity to read the report that I expect to publish later this year, so that you can take care of some of these things when you are deploying a SIEM solution. I just got a comment from one of our attendees, Leyland, who says there's an echo in my webinar. Can you just confirm if everything is okay? Let me just try let me just try muting and unmuting myself. It would be great if anyone else can just confirm if you can hear me loud and clear in the meantime. Okay, I've got confirmation from Davis, Chad, Joe, James, and Paul. Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth, Diego, and all the others. So I'm sorry about that to the attendee who had some issues. I hope it's resolved now. I'm sorry about that. I always get panicky if someone can't hear. If maybe I, maybe forgot to do something with the settings. Okay, so before we get started, just once again, appreciate your responses to the survey that you got on the chat box. I hope to share this report in the coming months so that it benefits everybody to really see, you might get a statistic like 60% of the IT community that is using a SIEM solution struggles with the deployment because of reason X. Right, so these would be good things to know when you go about deploying a tool so that you know what other people in the market have experienced. And for me as an evangelist and for Manage Engine as a company, it helps us address some of those concerns. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate these responses. Don't worry that all of the data that you answer is all anonymized. So it would just be used to, develop some of these statistics in the report, and obviously none of the data will be used in the report. Okay, that's said and done. Let's get started with today's session. And I want to start off with one of my most favorite slides, which is from a Microsoft event wherein they talk about the attack timeline of a typical attack. Now, this slide is so crucial to what we are trying to do with today's webinar in sort of reiterating the need for a SIEM solution and then talking about, how it helps you meet various requirements of compliance regulations. Now, if you look at this slide, you will see that it talks about how long it takes for an attack to be carried out in an organization. You get to see when was the first host compromised, then when was domain admin compromised, and then when does the attack get discovered. And this is, of course, based on a huge study that Microsoft conducted. They're, of course, the boss of their own infrastructure, so they had enough of data to investigate and publish this report. And what is very alarming is that it takes only about 24 to 48 hours, which is under 2 days, for domain admin to be compromised after the first host is compromised, right? So the first host being compromised usually goes undetected. And then within 48 hours, on average, domain admin is compromised. And you all know what happens if someone gets hold of the domain admin privilege. And then the dwell time, which is how long it takes for the attack to be discovered, can be as large as 150 days. In fact, this is the average. It says the mean dwell time is 150 days. And of course, there's another point that says attackers often target Active Directory because Active Directory is connected to all of your business resources. So that is a good way, good entry point for attackers. But the real challenge, and this is what we're trying to solve, is that we want to make sure that when the first host is compromised, we are able to detect it. That would be the ideal case. Or scratch that. The ideal case would be, having preventive solutions that prevent the host from being compromised. But as we all know, preventive solutions are not a 100% guarantee. And, inevitably something is going to be bypassed, meaning you have to be prepared to detect the first host compromise. Now, if you're not able to detect that first host compromise, you should be at least detecting the domain admin getting compromised 24 to 48 hours later, because that would be a big tipping point in the attack kill chain, and you want to be able to detect and mitigate the attack there. Now, in the worst case scenario, in case you're not even able to do that, you at least need to make sure that when you do discover the attack, earlier the better, of course, you then have the data in terms of what were the security events that happened in that attack that you can now reference so that you can backtrack the incident, go back to the domain admin compromise, go back to that day, look at the events, go back to the first host being compromised, just backtracking the attack in what we call a forensic investigation and identify what exactly happened so that you can then now, do the damage assessments and damage control and also, make sure such a thing doesn't happen in the future. Now, this is exactly what a compliance regulation is trying to enforce, right? What I told you might just seem like common sense in terms of, yeah, this is what we're trying to solve. We want to detect the attack as quickly as possible. And in the worst case scenario where we are not able to detect the attack and it results in a data breach, we need to be able to backtrack the incident, gather important evidence about what exactly happened. And if it's not too late, be able to do that damage control and mitigation. And even if it's too late, you may still be expected to disclose this compromise to the affected individuals. So if someone's data got leaked, it's your responsibility to tell that and come clean, so to speak, and notify the people who had their data compromised. So this is exactly what a compliance regulation is trying to enforce when they talk about security monitoring. So the idea is you want to detect the security incident at an early stage, maintain the audit trail for future reference. This would be in case you have to backtrack the security incident. You also want to implement a streamlined process to respond to the incident. Because again, in the previous slide, it said that dwell time is 150 days. This is not just because of the attack detection lacking, but also the lack of proper processes to review and investigate security events that result in attacks going undetected. And the final point is reporting the incident, which I alluded to in the previous slide, that you are expected to disclose the fact that you have been breached to the people whose data was compromised and to the authorities governing your business or your industry. In fact, this is one of the big requirements that we see in data protection regulations like the GDPR. The GDPR, in fact, expects you to disclose a data breach within 72 hours of knowing the compromise. And what did we see in the previous slide? That it takes way too long for an organization on average to detect that they have been attacked. And the GDPR is essentially saying, it's putting a time limit and saying that once you discover the breach, you have only 72 hours to notify the breach to the authorities with relevant details. And it's not just the GDPR, it's the GDPR, of course, was a sort of trendsetter, and Europe and EU is sort of leading the way in terms of some of these data protection rights for its citizens, but pretty much the entire world is following suit, right? Like you have in the US, in California, you have something called the CCPA that came into effect this year, the California Consumer Protection Act. And you have very similar regulations that we work with at ManageEngine in various other countries. And the template is very similar. They want you to report security incidents to the authorities with the details of what happened. So here are some trends with regards to, it's more specific to SIEM solutions. What are the kinds of things that you're expected to do? Well, the main point of all of these regulations is to protect personal data, right? It is to make sure that personal data of whether it's customers or whether it's employees, this is the priority of any of these regulations. They want you to make sure that you are protecting sensitive data. They want you to be accountable, meaning it's not something that you can just say, I've collected the data and now you're the boss, that you get to decide to do what you want to do with the data, but rather that you have to be accountable for the fact that you are now dealing with someone else's personal information, and you need to have appropriate measures in place to ensure security. And with regards to SIEM, regular assessments becomes really important. This entails monitoring your network on a daily basis, making sure that you are tracking important activities happening in your organization on a daily basis, particularly focusing on things like your data accesses. So who's accessing and modifying your data? These are certain things that you need to be mindful of when it comes to deploying a SIEM solution. And like we touched upon, you also need to plan for incident management and recovery. So your SIEM solution needs to be properly orchestrated with your other security solutions, as well as your other kinds of IT tools like your ITSM help desk, for example. And you need to have a process that is defined in your organization that will allow your security analysts and other administrators to follow up on incidents and make sure that that is a process to swiftly detect and mitigate security incidents in your organization. And then, of course, reporting breaches that we spoke about. In those worst case scenarios, right? Just going back to that slide from Microsoft, essentially what we did is we are saying, yeah, we will do our best and we make sure that we detect and mitigate incidents at an early stage. And that is the best case scenario. But even in that worst case scenario, you need to know exactly what happened, right? Whether it was the data of 5 people getting compromised, or was it 500 people? Was it an attack on one server, or 5 or 6 servers? These are things that you need to track. So when it comes to deploying a SIEM solution, this is the typical process that we're looking at. A SIEM solution is essentially going to help you monitor your network, watch out for specific events, and help you do that attack detection and mitigation before it's too late. So when you deploy a SIEM, the first thing you do is define what we call an audit policy. The audit policy essentially tells a system what are the events for which it needs to record a log entry for. And once these audit policies have been defined, you are going to then collect all of these logs into your central repository, which is what your SIEM solution is. Once your SIEM has this data, once your SIEM has collected all of this data, it is going to report on this data for you. It is going to simultaneously archive this information, which is mandated by a lot of compliance regulations. And you can think about, why is archival important, right? Because if an organization is taking 5 months to discover an attack, you obviously need logs from 5 months ago if you are backtracking the incident. So that is where archival becomes important for a forensic investigation. But what is even more important is being able to do real-time analytics on the data that you're collecting, so that you can raise alerts for security, possible security threats that you can then investigate and respond to. So this is essentially the process that we are looking at. Now let me go over Manage Engine's offering in this space, which is Log360. Log360 is Manage Engine's integrated comprehensive SIEM platform, which is really an integration of multiple tools that we have brought under a unified interface. The 2 main components of this solution are AD Audit Plus, which is a real-time Active Directory auditing tool, and Event Log Analyzer, which is a general log management tool that can monitor your network perimeter and application sources. And on top of Log360 sits the Log360 UEBA or UEBA component, which helps you apply machine learning techniques to spot anomalies on the data collected by Log360. So when I say integrated solution, this is what I mean. I'm not going to go, I'll come back to the interface in a bit, but essentially what you have here is the Log360 interface, wherein you can see we are currently in the event log analyzer component, but we also have the AD Audit Plus component and a few other components that you can use. Things like if you have an Office 365 environment that you want to monitor, you can do that as well. And then we have the UEBA component, which I will come back into in just a few minutes. But essentially what we are looking at is an integrated solution which unifies the capabilities of many monitoring tools from Manage Engine. And when it comes to compliance, we have dedicated reports, prepackaged compliance reports for various regulations like PCI, FISMA, HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, and so on. Won't go into the details into specific regulations, but this is Manage Engine's offering when it comes to the security monitoring and compliance space. Now, when you are deploying a solution, whether it's Manage Engine or any other vendor, here are some considerations to keep in mind when you deploy the tool. The first thing that you want to think about is what are your event sources in your organization? Firstly, you need to know from the point of view of the compliance regulation that you're talking about, what are the systems that come under the scope of the regulation? Because typically some of these data protection regulations will expect the monitoring to be done on the systems that store that specific type of information, like cardholder data or healthcare data. So identify what are the event sources that you have. Then think about what are the kind of events that you need to be tracking. Things like logons, file folder accesses, changes made to network policies or Active Directory and so on. Then think about, now that these are the events that you need to track, what is the log flow rate? Meaning what is the events per second, so to speak, how many events get generated in your network every second, and if your network's bandwidth and your server's capacity can handle that load. Then think about how do you collect and store the logs. You need to collect the logs from different sources. So you need to know what kind of protocols and in terms of communication protocols need to be used, or in which cases do you need to use an agent to collect the data. Where do I store the logs is, you need to have a secure place where you can store the logs that you've collected. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Then think about the reporting and alerting. And we just touch upon all of these things in just a few minutes. Think about what kind of reports you need to generate in order to visualize and analyze the security events. What kind of alerts need to be configured so that you get notified for specific events of interest. Then think about what are the threat detection capabilities. So we spoke about analytics as a way by which you can spot specific events of interest, right? And at an early stage. So you need to think about what kind of capabilities does the solution offer when it comes to threat detection. And finally, we keep stressing on this. How do I manage incidents? How do I, once the incident is detected, how do I now manage it, investigate, and respond to it as quickly as possible? So these are some things to keep in mind. And don't worry, we will send you the slide deck as well as the recording of the session. So you can always review these pointers at a later time. But you can see that there are just a couple of things that I'm really reiterating time and again in this presentation, which is that you need to, one, be in a position to detect an attack at an early stage. And two is once you detect the attack, you need to be able to manage and mitigate that attack quickly. So now let's look at 6 capabilities of SIEM solutions that play a vital role in this process of monitoring your network for compliance. And the first of the 6 capabilities is log aggregation. So log aggregation refers to bringing in data from your various sources into a central platform. And that is what your SIEM solution really is. Because if you have events happening on different parts of your infrastructure, you need a unified view of what's going on. You need to have a one-stop shop, so to speak, to go there and see exactly what's happening on your domain controller, on your servers, on your network perimeter, on your cloud platforms, everything from a single console. And that is important because that helps you instantly know what is going on in your network. That helps you instantly know what is happening without much sweat. You also want to bring in logs from your custom sources. And the reason I mention this as a separate point is because your SIEM solution should never leave a log source behind. Because if the moment you say, oh, my SIEM does not support, maybe a specific web application or does not support maybe my Office 365, now you're defeating the purpose of having a SIEM solution. Because a SIEM is an aggregator. It's a unified platform of everything that's happening in your network that you can just go into that one console to monitor everything in your infrastructure. So make sure your SIEM solution can truly aggregate data from any source. And don't forget the data from your security solution, some of the other security solutions that you may have. Because a lot of your security tools are, of course, extremely powerful, but they all work in silos. Your vulnerability tool might not really know what your endpoint protection solution is flagging. And here again, you need that unified view of everything that's going on in your network. Let me quickly show you how this would look like in a solution. So this is the event log analyzer component of Log360. I'm not going to go too deep into the tool itself, but just want to, just tie together and reiterate some of the things that we spoke about in log aggregation. So we help you add sources for monitoring in a seamless manner. We categorize the main devices into Windows, syslog, and other devices. Windows, of course, would be your traditional Windows servers and workstations. Syslog devices would be your Linux, Unix machines, as well as your network perimeter equipment. And you have some other devices. You may have an IBM ES400 machine or an ESXi that you can add for monitoring. We also have the ability to import log data. These could be typically from custom sources wherein a log file gets written to a specified location. And you have the ability to import that data from a local shared remote or cloud path into the solution. Then you can also bring in data from your application sources like your database and web applications, as well as a few other applications like a printer or terminal server. Then you have file integrity monitoring, and we'll touch upon this again in a few minutes, wherein you can add files from whether it's Windows or Linux-based machines. You can bring in data from file folder events into the solution. Then you have the ability to add your threat solutions like your antivirus, anti-malware, and other threat solutions that you may have, maybe an endpoint protection tool. You can bring in data from that as well. Then you have what we call threat intelligence, which allows you to bring in threat feeds, sync up with threat feeds, so that you can contextualize the data that is, contextualize the log data that is being collected. Because if I tell you, for example, let's see, I have a network traffic, that is going to a specific outbound IP address. And if I just tell you that, that by itself doesn't make much sense. But if I tell you that that outbound IP address is a blacklisted IP address according to a threat feed, you suddenly have an incident that you might want to track. So here we allow you to add your own threat feeds that you might have subscribed to, as well as having a built-in threat intelligence platform, which has some open source threat feeds that has been bundled up with the product. And then you have vulnerability data. This could be your vulnerability scanners that you can monitor using our solution. This was just to give you a general idea of, you have to ingest data from various sources, and whether it's importing data, whether you are using an agent to collect it, whether you are using agentless protocols. Point is that some of the sources that I just quickly ran through, you might want to think about whether you have those sources in your infrastructure, and how can you now monitor that with a SIEM solution. Because only once you add the devices for monitoring, you get these neat dashboards that give a high-level overview of everything that is happening in your network. So here I have, for example, I can quickly see how many events have happened in my network in one glance, right? I can see that I have 29,000K events. I can see that these are the top devices generating events. These are the monthly log trends. These are the severity levels of the events. I can now say, let me look at the network perimeter, and I can see, oh, these are the allowed and denied connections by the firewall. These are the traffic trends. These are the websites accessed. These are the VPN logons, right? All of this is possible because I'm aggregating data. I have data, maybe I have multiple firewalls. Maybe I have firewalls even from different vendors, but I get that unified view in one single dashboard. Finally, your security overview. This is what I meant, that you have multiple security solutions working in silos. You can unify them. You can correlate events and find out threats. You can identify threats from your threat sources, which are the different things like your antivirus, anti-malware tools that we saw in just a few minutes ago. You can look at, oh, these are the IDS, IPS attacks. These are, the endpoints that might have been compromised. All of this is available in a single pane because you have ingested data from so many sources or aggregated data from so many sources. And now you're able to visualize this in a neat summary on your dashboard. Okay, so that is the first step, log aggregation. The second step is securing the log data, right? Obviously, your logs are important. You need to make sure that they're accurate and no one has, tampered with your logs. Because if I were an attacker, I would try to overwrite your log files so that I can cover my tracks. So you need to make sure that the log collection process in your SIEM solution is secure. And this is mandated by a lot of compliance regulations. They talk about ensuring technical measures to have proper secure communication protocols, because if your SIEM solution is connecting with a database, the communication for the receiving of the logs should use certain secure communication protocols. So you have to make sure that you have a SIEM that can do that for you. Make sure that you check your regulations to see if there are specific, techniques that are mandated. If it is more general, where they say you need to have technical measures in place, here are some things that you can do. For one, you can define access controls in your solution so that only authorized personnel have access to log data in the first place. On top of that, you can employ techniques like encryption. You can do timestamping, which will, on your log archives, which will tell you if someone has accessed it, then the timestamp will change. So something, maybe someone tried to access it. And then you do an integrity check wherein you scan the log files, you record its, its contents. And then if somebody changes it, the integrity check will flag that someone went and changed something in your log archives. So again, this is how I'll just quickly show you how this would look like in a solution. I might have to just refresh on that. Sorry about that. I just not going to go too deep into our solution itself, but just kind of showing you, what to expect when you deploy a solution. And this could be Manage Engine or any other tool that you have. Just certain things to keep in mind when you're deploying a SIEM. So you have the archives that you want to check, right? So you can see here on the screen, it talks about, what are the logs that have been archived. We get to see certain, of course, high level details about what was the log source and when was it archived and so on, and the size. But we also see this integrity, which means that this shows that it's verified, meaning we have checked and ensured that the log archives are as is when they were collected, right? Whereas if someone goes and changes something, this verified would change and it would say that something was tampered. But on top of that, this is more a reactive approach. But on top of that, you can also enable archiving. You have the option right here, and you can encrypt the data so that is a stronger way of preventing any misuse of your log files. So this is something to keep in mind, that don't just think that when we say log aggregation and bringing in the logs is one thing, but make sure you do it securely, make sure it's collected securely, make sure it is stored securely, and you have these technical measures in place to ensure that it's tamper-proof. The next thing is generating audit reports to track granular events. So the dashboards gave a high-level overview of what's going on in the network, but your audit reports are going to give you details about specific kinds of events, right? Like a logon or a file access. And these are extremely important because they help you review what has happened in your network, and you can validate all of these events. So when you generate reports, check your compliance regulation and see if they mandate specific events to be tracked, or whether they have generally given a high level description of tracking, common events of interest or something like that. And check to see if they have requested specific log fields to be extracted from the logs. So they might have said, like, you need to track the user IDs, the date and time, the IP address, and so on. And you need to make sure then that you are pulling out those details from your log fields. So you need to then schedule these reports. This may again vary depending on the regulation, but a good best practice is to do it every day. Meaning you have a report generated for the security events of interest on a daily basis, so that you can then go and view these events every morning and see if the last 24 hours everything was happened properly, or if there was anything that was anomalous that you might then want to follow up on and escalate it to the incident team. So this is about audit report generation. And the idea is that we want to flag and investigate a suspicious event. Let me quickly show you how that would look like. Maybe I can go to the AD Audit Plus component to illustrate this example. AD Audit Plus is a real-time Active Directory auditing tool that comes with hundreds of pre-built granular reports for tracking events happening in your Active Directory. So I have a report here that says failures, logon failures, which shows me how many logon failures happened in the last 24 hours. So if this is an important system that you want to track, you can have this logon failure report generated. It will be sent to you. You can go through these individual events. You can see that important details have been pulled out from the log field. Things like the username, the client IP address, the host name, domain controller, the logon time, and so on for these logon failures. And you can then validate and see that, oh, these might have been routine, or you see that, oh, there was an account lockout, and you might then want to investigate that account lockout. And we present such details to you right there on what was the root cause of the account lockout. So when you schedule, you can schedule such reports. It could be any other thing that you see on the left pane. We have so many granular reports. You might want to see, for example, changes made to Active Directory. You might want to see what are the changes in the last 24 hours made in Active Directory. you can then track all of these things, the who, where, when, and what, and you can see exactly what's going on. You can schedule these reports and say that you want it to be generated every 24 hours and email to you so that you can get it on the act, you can review what's going on, and like we saw in the example of the fail logon, you are able to spot maybe an account lockout and then immediately investigate the cause of the account lockout then and there. So that is again part of the incident investigation and management aspect, right? Because it's not just about knowing that some logon failures happen, but you need to be able to investigate if you feel something is suspicious. You need important details to be able to really investigate what's going on and flag that and then investigate those suspicious events. And the next aspect is the analytics. So this is what is going to help you detect attacks then and there, because your audit reports are great, but they still have a 24-hour delay in the sense that you're going to flag something the next morning when you are reviewing the reports. But for certain kinds of events, and you might want to be notified immediately so that you can start investigating right away. It could be for a notable account getting locked out. It could be, we saw a report for all Active Directory changes, but maybe you are concerned about a specific kind of Active Directory change. Maybe a modification to a service account, or maybe the group membership of domain admins changing. For such kind of events, you might want to get notified immediately and get a real-time alert for that. So you can define alerting rules so that for specific events of interest, you get notified. On top of that, you can use what we call correlation algorithms, which will help you correlate events happening across systems and applications and flag a suspicious pattern of events that might indicate a potential compromise. And then you have a relatively newer technology called UEBA or UEBA, which uses machine learning techniques in order to flag anomalies, unusual behaviors, and it uses a concept called a risk score to tell you what is the probability that a specific user or system is under attack. So I think the alerting rules are quite straightforward in terms of, you are looking at a specific event, very specific criteria, like the group membership of domain admins changing, and you want to set up a trigger for that. Let me quickly show you how correlation and UEBA look like in our solution. So I'm just going to quickly jump back into Log360. And if I go to the correlation section of the solution, I just want to show you how an entire pattern of events gets tracked. Right? So I have some simulated data of an attack that has happened on a critical server, and it's been tracked using events happening on the server as well as events happening on a privileged access management solution, which has been used to grant the privileged access. So there are multiple events that are happening in the correlation. You can see some special privileges assigned to a logon. This account successfully logged on, and a network share object was accessed. A process has been created, a process has exited. You see many different events, and all of these happened within a short period of time, within a few minutes. You can see basically something like 12:22 a.m. till 12:25 a.m. within a short period of time. And all of these events together have been flagged by the correlation algorithm. And you are presented an alert that you can now investigate and see what were the events that happened in that kill chain. So this is an entire pattern that is being tracked. Rather than getting an alert for each individual event like a successful logon or a network share object being accessed, you get an alert for this entire incident, which has been tracked in a neat way, presented to you, and you get to then investigate, click on details and investigate these individual events that happen. Now, this is correlation. And then you have UEBA or UEBA, which stands for User and Entity Behavior Analytics. And this uses machine learning techniques to work on the data that has already been collected by your solution so that it can then see if any of those events triggered by a user or system was anomalous. So what does that mean? Anomalous means that it is something that is, out of the ordinary. Maybe a user usually works from 9 to 5, and maybe they access a file at 1 a.m. in the middle of the night and copy some sensitive data. So those are anomalies, and UEBA can detect such anomalies and raise the risk score associated to that user or system. So on the left pane, you can see numbers have been assigned to various users. These are the risk scores, which tell you the probability that this user is under attack, and it gives you this risk score based on the anomalies. So you can click on a risk on the risk score. You can drill down to the individual anomalies that are taking place for which the risk score has been increased for this user. You can investigate what were the activities that happened, and you can quickly prioritize this investigation, put this user on a watch list that you can see right here, and you can reduce the time it takes to detect the attack. Because if you see that a user is triggering multiple anomalies, you might want to say, hey, hang on, what's going on here? And quickly start investigating the incident before something major happens. And UEBA is particularly useful for tracking insider threats, which happen to be a little bit more persistent in that they happen over several days, weeks, or even months. So it's not something that a correlation engine, which typically works on a short period of time, can track. So this machine learning based analytics becomes very useful for certain use cases. But make sure you have a blend of all of these three things in your tool: basic alerting criteria, correlation algorithms, as well as machine learning based analytics, so that you maximize the chance of detecting an attack at an early stage. And then you have file integrity monitoring, which is to ensure the integrity of your files and folders. This is mandated sometimes explicitly by the compliance regulations, which say that you have to, watch out for file folder accesses. You have to watch out for who is accessing and modifying your sensitive data. You have to review this, the same concepts that we spoke about, the reporting and alerting. You need to apply that for your file folder activities. So you have perhaps, specific file systems and file clusters in your organization. You need to be tracking who, which, when, and what for the files and folders, meaning who is accessing the files, which files were accessed, when was the access made, and what was the change, if any, in that access. So here again, the same idea of generating granular reports so that you can track these individual events periodically. So you can have a daily report that tells you all the files that were created in your file server, what was deleted, what was modified, what was renamed. And you can validate these changes and identify and make sure that only the appropriate individuals are accessing and also modifying your files and folders. So on that note, also make sure you're tracking the permissions to the files and folders, because that is again something to keep in mind. If someone changes the file permissions, that can create a loophole in your security systems. So file integrity monitoring is actually is just like any other security event, like tracking logons or active directory changes. and we still have the same ideas of report generation and alert triggering, which is, which is what you have to do to ensure that files and folders are protected, sensitive data is not tampered with. But the reason I put it out as a separate point is because, like I said, a lot of compliance regulations say that you need to deploy a file integrity monitoring tool, and it would be really convenient to have a SIEM solution such as Log360, which has a built-in file integrity monitoring functionality, so that you don't have to deploy another tool. And finally, the last thing that I want to talk about is the management and response for incidents. Right. So far, we have looked at how can we quickly detect when something goes wrong in the network. But as we've been saying throughout this webinar, it's also about managing and responding to the incident. And a lot of compliance regulations stress upon that process. You need to have administrators who are available 24/7, who are able to follow up on incidents that you flag, and they might have certain expectations. We saw with the GDPR, there is a deadline or a time frame within which you have to report the breach that was discovered. So for all of these kinds of requirements, it becomes really important to have a streamlined process to manage the incident. So make sure you have an accountable process in your organization. You can improve upon this by integrating with your ITSM help desk tools. You can create watch lists to prioritize your investigations, as we saw in the UEBA console. And you can also configure automation workflows to automate certain response actions, because the first level response actions are often predictable. Things like disabling a user or shutting down a system, and so on, or pinging a specific device. And these kinds of actions can be automated so that when you get in on the act, the first level response is already done and you can go to the next level of investigation. So I'm not going to go too deep into this, but in the same example that we saw of correlation, the idea is that now you've got an alert, you've come to the console to investigate, you need all of these important details presented to you in a neat way, as you can see on the screen. You then have to be able to drill down, click on details, and see what's going on that specific event. And you need to have the functionality to quickly navigate and pull out other logs from other sources, in just a few clicks. So I can click here on advanced view, and that takes me to the search engine, where I can query the database and pull out information that I need for a given context. So I have, maybe I'm looking for a specific event ID. So I click on an event ID. I choose a specific event ID that concerns me. I pulled out that specific information, and maybe this is the evidence that I was looking for. I can save this as a report, right? So this is what you would do once you get in on the act. Once you got the alert, you can come investigate this incident, view all the events that took place, and drill down to the root cause of an incident. But you can also have this done in a more streamlined way. As you can see on this table that shows the alerts that have been generated, you can see that there is an owner name associated to the alert, meaning these have been assigned to a specific administrator to look into, and you can see the status of the incident. So you can, for example, click on a specific incident and assign it to a specific administrator. You can track the status, and you can also, instead of doing this manually, you can define what we call alert assignment rules, so that when an alert is raised for a specific device or device group, it gets automatically assigned to a specific administrator. So you can say that maybe on this specific device, if there are any alarms, it has to get assigned to a specific administrator. You can also, like I said, integrate with your with a ticketing tool. So we integrate with ManageEngine's own Service Desk Plus, as well as some of these other vendors that you can see. And you can push these alerts as tickets to the designated administrator on your centralized help desk. So these kind of processes sometimes are mandated, and sometimes you can also show these to your auditors as your incident management process to show that accountable way that you manage incidents, to make sure that none of these alarms go unattended, and really to create that accountability in your organization. And finally, you can do workflows. Like I said, you can assign workflows to alarms. You can use some of the pre-built workflows that we give for doing things like blocking a USB, killing a process, disabling a computer, and logging off and disabling, doing multiple actions like that. You can associate these to alerts so that when the alert is triggered, automatically this action gets taken, so that when you come in on the act, when the alert is assigned to you as a technician and you come in on the act, the first level of response is already taken. So you can create such workflows using a bunch of pre-built actions that we give, that you can see on the left pane. So, and you can combine these actions using logical operators so that you can define an entire workflow and then associate it to an alert, which will appear then on the table right here. You can see a workflow status, which means that when you as an administrator come in to investigate, you can see, has this been assigned to someone already? What is the status? And did a workflow execute? And all of this reduces the time it takes for you to, investigate and respond to the incident. And this reduces the time it takes, for the attack to be mitigated, which was, like we discussed in the start, one of the main things that we are looking to solve with a SIEM solution. We're trying to make sure that attacks can be mitigated at an early stage, and having these response actions and incident management plans in place can really create a very streamlined, accountable process to detect and mitigate threats in your organization. Now, before we wrap up and I start answering a few questions, I just want to share a webinar that we are doing later this month, specifically focusing on the UEBA concept that we discussed. I saw a few questions also on people asking about UEBA. So this webinar will be useful for you to attend. It's happening at the end of this month on the 27th of August, in which we talk about how to prevent insider threats with anomaly detection using a UEBA solution. And this is in partnership with the analyst firm Forrester. So we have an analyst from Forrester who is going to co-present this session with a Manage Engine consultant. And you can register for this webinar. I'm just going to post it on the chat. So you've got a message on the chat, so you can register for this webinar that's happening end of the month if you want to learn more about Manage Engine's UEBA solution, but also the concepts and use cases and workings of machine learning-based anomaly detection. So let me just start answering a couple of questions before we wrap up this session. I've also launched a small poll on the screen that will help us know if you are evaluating Log360 and if you want a product specialist such as myself to assist you with a free evaluation of the solution. So if you just answer yes, then we will get in touch with you and we will help you deploy the solution in your infrastructure, and we will apply a 30-day free trial and help you add all your sources for monitoring, help you schedule the reports and generate the alerts so that you can start meeting your security monitoring requirements for compliance. So let me just answer a few questions. I have a question from Paul Robinson. Thank you for your question. Paul's question is, do you recommend using the agent for monitoring Windows systems with Log360? Well, we don't particularly recommend one over the other. We offer the flexibility to do both. So for Windows systems, we have an agentless mechanism that you can employ. It's as easy as, if I can just quickly go back to Event Log Analyzer, when you're adding your Windows systems for monitoring, we automatically discover your Windows devices based on the domain and work group. So once you have, you have selected a specific domain and work group, we will discover all of these devices. And when you click add and start monitoring, we can do the monitoring without an agent by using certain Windows protocols to connect to that device and extract the information. So we recommend using agents when you have, say, devices in a DMZ where the communication might not be possible. So we do have that option as well. But if you are looking at a regular monitoring and you want to do, collect data every 10 minutes, I'd suggest just doing an agentless technique. It's as simple as just selecting and adding your devices for monitoring, and we'll start, monitoring your network right away. So that's, I hope that answers your question, Paul. And anyone else who has more questions, you can also email me on the ID that you see on the screen. Many of you have requested for a personalized demo via the poll. So we'll reach out to you and answer your questions and also help you deploy the solution in your environment. So finally, I'll just take one more question, and I have one final poll on the screen, which is for the feedback for the session. So please take a few seconds to let me know if what you thought of this session. If you have any more suggestions for what kind of sessions you'd like to see going forward, you can reach out to me via email, and we can incorporate some of the things that you're looking for, because a lot of these sessions that we do is based on what some of our attendees of previous sessions requested. So if you have specific sessions in mind, do reach out and we can incorporate those sessions in the future. One final question, and this is from John, who wants to know if Log360 comes with both correlation and UEBA. I'm just paraphrasing your question, but I'm guessing this is what you meant. Yeah, so this comes with both. So Log360 has the UEBA, which is an add-on, which needs to simply be licensed, by buying that extra license. But once it's there, it's part of the same console, and it will start applying the machine learning-based analytics on the data that Log360 has collected. It will do the behavior profiling to form a security baseline, and subsequently, when anomalies are detected, it will raise the risk scores of the specific users or systems in concern. Like we showed you in that example, where you had risk scores assigned to different users. And the recommendation is to have both correlations as well as UEBA, as well as your granular alerting rules, because all these three put together will maximize the chance of you detecting an attack, which really is the objective of a SIEM solution. So thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. I hope you found the session useful. If you need anything more about Log360, do drop me an email and we can have a conversation offline. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and bye for now.